I never thought my own son would call me worthless at his wedding rehearsal dinner. The ballroom inside the Grand Hudson Hotel glowed with gold chandeliers and soft violin music while waiters carried trays of champagne between tables covered in white roses. Everyone looked beautiful that night except me. At 67 years old, I stood near the back of the room wearing the same navy coat I had owned for almost 10 years because I spent most of my savings helping Daniel through one financial disaster after another. I was adjusting a silver gift box near the dessert table when my elbow accidentally brushed against a champagne glass. The drink spilled across the white linen cloth and several guests gasped softly. Vanessa looked horrified for half a second before forcing a fake smile. But my son did not bother hiding his embarrassment. "Mom," Daniel snapped loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "can you please stop ruining things for once?" The room became painfully quiet around us. I felt every eye turning toward me while violin music continued in the background like nothing had happened. "I was only trying to help," I said softly while reaching for a napkin. Daniel laughed bitterly and shook his head. "Help," he repeated. "You do not even understand what kind of event this is." Vanessa lowered her eyes, pretending to avoid conflict, but I noticed the small satisfied smile hiding near the corner of her mouth. A few younger guests exchanged uncomfortable glances while Daniel stepped closer toward me with frustration written all over his face. "Honestly, Mom," he muttered coldly, "sometimes you act completely worthless." The word hit harder than I expected because for a moment all I could hear was the sound of my late husband's voice telling me years ago that family loyalty mattered more than money ever would. I quietly folded the napkin in my hands and looked toward the ballroom entrance again. Then I checked the time on my watch for the third time that evening because someone important was already late. Daniel walked away before I could answer him, and the conversation around the ballroom slowly returned like people were pretending nothing humiliating had just happened. I kept my eyes lowered while smoothing wrinkles from the damp tablecloth because sometimes silence protects dignity better than anger ever can. Vanessa stepped beside me holding her champagne glass carefully away from my direction this time. "Do not take it personally," she whispered with fake sympathy. "Daniel is under a lot of pressure tonight." I nodded once even though both of us knew that was not the real reason. Across the ballroom guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers while photographers moved between tables capturing expensive smiles and staged happiness. Meanwhile, I was quietly moved farther away from the center of the room. One of the hotel staff politely guided me toward a small table near the service hallway beside stacked catering trays and swinging kitchen doors. "This area might be more comfortable for you," Vanessa said softly. Comfortable. I almost smiled hearing that word. 20 years earlier I had slept inside hospital waiting rooms beside Daniel after his father died unexpectedly from a stroke. I worked double shifts and sold my wedding jewelry just to keep our family afloat. But now my own son looked embarrassed by my presence because my coat was old and my hands trembled slightly with age. A middle-aged woman from Daniel's office approached me quietly after watching everything unfold. "Are you all right?" she asked carefully. Before I could answer, Daniel suddenly raised a champagne glass near the dance floor, preparing to begin his rehearsal speech. "Tonight is about new beginnings," he announced proudly while guests applauded around him. Then his eyes landed on me near the kitchen entrance and his expression hardened again. and finally leaving behind everything that has held me back. Several people turned toward me immediately. I felt my chest tighten while slowly reaching for my watch again because the person I had been waiting for was now exactly 15 minutes late. The applause after Daniel's speech sounded distant to me now, like I was hearing everything through water instead of inside a ballroom filled with people who once called themselves family friends. I stayed near the service hallway watching waiters carry silver trays through swinging kitchen doors while guests gathered around my son praising his future and congratulating Vanessa on her diamond ring. Not one person asked why the groom's mother was sitting alone beside stacked catering supplies. Vanessa approached my table again with a perfectly polished smile. "Daniel did not mean to upset you," she said softly while adjusting the bracelet around her wrist. "Tonight is emotional for everyone." I looked at her for a moment before answering quietly. "Some emotions reveal character more than others." Her smile faded slightly. Across the room, Daniel laughed with several investors from Brooks Holdings while discussing honeymoon plans in Italy and future expansion projects like the company already belonged entirely to him. He never noticed the older man standing silently near the ballroom entrance holding a black leather briefcase. I noticed immediately. Attorney Michael Carter had finally arrived. Relief passed through me so quickly I nearly closed my eyes. But before I could stand, Daniel spotted him too. His confident expression brightened instantly as he walked across the ballroom toward the lawyer. "Michael," he said loudly while shaking his hand, "perfect timing. I was wondering if you would make it before tomorrow's trust signing." Several nearby guests turned curious hearing the word trust. Michael did not smile back. His eyes moved past Daniel directly toward me sitting alone beside the kitchen hallway. The room suddenly felt colder somehow. "Actually," Michael answered carefully, "I came tonight because there has been a serious misunderstanding regarding your family assets." Daniel laughed lightly at first. "What misunderstanding?" Michael slowly tightened his grip on the leather briefcase before giving an answer that made Vanessa lose color instantly. "The Brooks Family Trust," he said quietly, "does not legally belong to you." The ballroom fell into complete silence after Michael spoke because suddenly nobody cared about wedding speeches or champagne anymore. Daniel stared at the lawyer with confusion slowly turning into irritation while Vanessa tightened her grip around his arm. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked sharply. Michael remained calm beneath the warm chandelier light. "I am saying the Brooks Family Trust was never transferred into your ownership." Several guests exchanged nervous glances while violin music quietly stopped near the dance floor. I stayed seated beside the service hallway watching everything unfold exactly the way my late husband once warned me it eventually would. Daniel laughed once without humor. "That is impossible. My father built Brooks Holdings for me." Michael slowly opened the black leather briefcase and removed a thick folder filled with legal documents. "Your father created protections after the market collapse in 2008, he explained carefully. Those protections placed all controlling assets under a permanent trustee agreement." Vanessa finally spoke with visible tension in her voice. "So who controls the trust?" Michael did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes moved toward me again. I could feel guests beginning to follow his gaze across the ballroom toward the lonely table near the kitchen entrance where Daniel had sent me less than 20 minutes earlier. My son noticed it too. "Mom," he asked slowly, confusion replacing confidence now. I folded my hands quietly in my lap, remembering nights spent balancing unpaid company debts after my husband died while Daniel slept upstairs, believing everything in life would always remain easy. Michael placed one final document carefully onto the nearest table. "Mrs. Eleanor Brooks," he announced calmly, "has remained sole trustee and majority owner of Brooks Holdings for the last 19 years. Vanessa's face lost all color. Daniel stared at me like he suddenly realized he had never truly known his own mother at all. Then Michael delivered another sentence that changed the atmosphere inside the ballroom completely. "And tonight," he said quietly, "Mrs. Brooks must decide whether the trust will continue supporting her son's future marriage." The silence inside the ballroom became almost unbearable after Michael revealed the truth, because every person who ignored me earlier was suddenly staring like they had never seen me before. Daniel looked pale beneath the chandelier lights while Vanessa slowly released his arm as though touching him now made her nervous. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "why would Dad hide something like this from me?" I stood slowly from the small table beside the kitchen hallway and smoothed the wrinkles from my old navy coat before walking toward the center of the ballroom for the first time all evening. Guests stepped aside silently as I passed. "Your father did not hide it from you," I answered calmly. "He protected it from you." Daniel's face tightened immediately. "Protected it?" Michael removed another document from the briefcase. "After Mr. Brooks passed away," he explained carefully, "Brooks Holdings was nearly bankrupt. Mrs. Brooks personally paid company debts using her own inheritance from her family." Shock spread visibly across several investors standing nearby. Vanessa stared at me speechless while I remembered selling my first home and cashing retirement accounts just to keep payroll checks from bouncing 20 years earlier. Daniel shook his head slowly. "That cannot be true." Michael calmly slid financial records across the table toward him. "The penthouse you live in. Your luxury vehicle. Even this wedding venue. All funded through assets legally controlled by your mother." The ballroom erupted into whispers so loud the musicians near the stage stopped pretending to play entirely. I watched Daniel's confidence collapse piece by piece while Vanessa suddenly looked around the room like she no longer recognized the future she thought she married into. Then Michael delivered the final revelation that shattered everything completely. "There is also one more condition inside the trust agreement," he announced quietly. "Mrs. Brooks has full authority to remove Daniel Brooks from all executive inheritance rights effective immediately." Daniel looked like the floor beneath him had disappeared completely while whispers spread across the ballroom faster than the music ever had earlier that evening. Vanessa stepped backward slowly, her expression filled with panic now instead of confidence. "There has to be some mistake," Daniel said quickly while grabbing the documents from the table with shaking hands. Michael remained perfectly calm. These agreements were reviewed and renewed every year for nearly 2 decades. Daniel flipped through pages desperately before looking toward me again. "You controlled everything this whole time?" I met his eyes quietly. I protected everything. Vanessa suddenly spoke with tension breaking through her polished voice. Daniel told me the company was already his. Several nearby guests pretended not to listen while clearly hearing every word. Daniel turned toward her immediately. It will be mine eventually, he insisted. Michael closed the briefcase slowly. Not unless Mrs. Brooks decides otherwise. The sentence landed harder than any insult thrown at me earlier that night. I could see it in Daniel's face now. For the first time since arriving at the hotel, he was no longer the powerful groom controlling the room. He was simply a frightened son realizing his future depended on the same woman he humiliated beside the kitchen hallway less than an hour ago. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Before I could answer, Michael removed one final envelope from inside the briefcase. There is another matter that must be addressed tonight, he said carefully. Daniel frowned immediately. What matter? Michael slid the sealed envelope across the table toward me. Your late father requested this letter be opened only if Daniel ever publicly disrespected his mother. The entire ballroom went silent again. Even the waiters stopped moving. Daniel stared at the envelope like it might destroy everything left standing around him. Then I slowly placed my fingers on the seal while my son whispered something I had not heard from him in years. Mom. Please do not open it. My fingers rested on the sealed envelope while the ballroom remained completely silent around me. Daniel looked terrified now in a way I had not seen since he was a little boy standing outside the principal's office after getting into trouble at school. Mom, he said again more softly this time, please. Vanessa turned toward him sharply. What is inside that letter? She whispered. Daniel did not answer her. His eyes stayed locked on mine while guests waited breathlessly around us. I slowly broke the seal and unfolded the letter written in my husband's familiar handwriting. For a moment my chest tightened seeing his name again after all these years. Then I began reading aloud. If this letter is being opened, I said carefully, it means my son has forgotten the sacrifices made for him. Daniel lowered his head immediately. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances while Michael stood silently beside me. I continued reading. Eleanor built this family back from ruin after my death. Every dollar Daniel enjoys exists because his mother protected him from consequences he never even saw. Vanessa stared at Daniel with growing disbelief. You told me your father left you everything, she said quietly. Daniel finally snapped back with frustration. Because I thought he did. I folded the letter slowly. Your father left you opportunity, I answered calmly. Not entitlement. The words hit harder than any public humiliation earlier that night. Daniel stepped closer toward me while lowering his voice. What do you want me to say? I looked directly at him for the first time all evening without fear or sadness. Nothing, I answered. For once I want you to understand instead of speak. The ballroom remained frozen around us until Michael quietly interrupted. Mrs. Brooks, he said carefully, there is still the matter of tomorrow morning's executive transfer vote. Daniel's face drained again instantly because suddenly he realized the wedding was no longer the biggest event waiting for him tomorrow. The atmosphere inside the Grand Hudson Hotel changed completely after Michael mentioned the executive transfer vote because suddenly the wedding no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a public collapse happening in slow motion beneath crystal chandeliers and expensive flower arrangements. Daniel looked around the ballroom desperately as if searching for someone willing to rescue him from humiliation the same way I had rescued him his entire life. But nobody moved. Several investors from Brooks Holdings quietly stepped away from him near the bar while whispers spread faster through the room than the music earlier that evening. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly across her white dress and stared at Daniel with visible disbelief. "You told me you were taking over the company next quarter," she said sharply under her breath. "I was supposed to," Daniel answered quickly. "Then why does your mother control everything?" He had no answer for her this time. I watched the panic growing between them while snow drifted softly outside the ballroom windows overlooking Manhattan. Michael adjusted his tie calmly before speaking again. "Tomorrow morning the board will vote on permanent leadership restructuring." Daniel turned toward him immediately. "You cannot seriously be considering removing me." Michael's expression never changed. "That decision belongs entirely to Mrs. Brooks." Hearing those words spoken publicly shattered whatever confidence Daniel still had left. One of the senior investors quietly approached me near the center table. "Mrs. Brooks," he said respectfully, "we had no idea you were still overseeing the company personally." I nodded once. "Most people stopped asking years ago." Across the ballroom, Vanessa slowly removed her engagement ring and placed it onto the table beside Daniel's untouched champagne glass. His face lost all color instantly. "Vanessa," he whispered. She stepped backward carefully. "I do not even know who you are anymore." Then she walked away toward the hotel exit while every guest in the ballroom silently watched Daniel stand completely alone for the first time in his life. Snow was falling gently over Manhattan by the time I finally walked toward the ballroom exit with Michael beside me and hundreds of quiet thoughts weighing heavier than the cold winter air outside. Behind me I could still hear low whispers spreading through the hotel while guests slowly realized the glamorous wedding they came to celebrate had turned into something completely different. Daniel stood alone near the center of the ballroom staring at the abandoned engagement ring resting beside his untouched champagne glass. For the first time in years he looked small again. Not powerful. Not important. Just lost. I paused near the doorway when I heard his voice behind me. "Mom." The word sounded different now, softer, somehow stripped of arrogance and pride. I turned slowly while snow reflected through the tall glass windows around us. Daniel walked closer but stopped several feet away like he no longer knew whether he deserved to stand near me at all. His eyes were red and exhausted. "I thought success meant never needing anyone," he admitted quietly. "I did not realize I was standing on your sacrifices the entire time." For a moment neither of us spoke. I looked at the boy I once held through nightmares and school failures and heartbreak long before expensive suits and corporate titles convinced him he was self-made. "Money changes people slowly," I said gently. sometimes so slowly they do not notice what they are becoming until they lose something real. Daniel lowered his head again while snow continued drifting outside the ballroom windows. Michael quietly stepped toward the elevator to give us privacy. My son finally looked back at me with the same honesty I had not seen since he was young. "Can we ever fix this?" he asked softly. I held my coat tighter against the cold and gave him the only truthful answer I had left. "That depends on whether you want your inheritance back," I said calmly, "or your family." Then I walked into the snowy Manhattan night while my son remained standing beneath the ballroom lights, finally understanding the difference between wealth and worth.